this is an area where I've conducted research and other people have actually looked at what are strategies we can use to avoid disclosing costly information. Because sometimes, like honesty, we know or we suspect that we can't actually be honest. So what should we do instead? Well, in these situations, a frequent go-to strategy people want to use is explicitly declining to disclose and saying, I don't want to answer that question. The reason why that strategy generally isn't good interpersonally is that we infer people's motives and make judgments of them based off of those inferred motives. And if we think people are being forthcoming, we view them as very trustworthy and likable. If we think that they're hiding information, we don't view them as trustworthy and likable. And saying, I don't want to answer your questions, you're essentially, rather than helping to build that social bond, you're telling the person, I don't view you as a trustworthy person. I'm not going to tell you. So that's when people can actually, where it can be very useful to use one of the more deceptive strategies. And we frequently actually view deception as wrong. We're told growing up, oh, you should never lie. But that's just bad general advice because everyone does. In fact, we're actually programmed to do it. If children don't start lying by the age of 4, it's actually a warning sign that they don't have theory of mind, which means that they know someone else has different thoughts than them and they can actually shape them. So it's just a fundamental part of human behavior. And there's a few different tactics you can actually use when it comes to disclosure. So the one that everyone's familiar with is a lie of commission. Flat out lying is very effective, but it's also very risky because if someone discovers that you had lied to them, obviously we don't like that person. We don't trust them. So, and then also it can be psychologically very difficult because we don't like thinking of ourselves as liars. So we don't like using that strategy. So if you don't feel comfortable actually using a lie, or the other additional risk is you could potentially face legal risk as well in some context if you're actually caught lying. People will instead turn to one of the other strategies, such as paltering. And a summary of these strategies will be posted online so people can see them. So the summary of it will be available later. So paltering is where you use truthful statements intended to mislead. So an example of this is, so I actually have lived experience. If I'm out for drinks with people and I don't know them well, and they ask me, why aren't you drinking? I just tell them I have migraines. It's true, but I'm also leaving out the underlying cause for the migraines. Paltering can be a very effective strategy because we feel more comfortable delivering it because we're using truthful statements. Our counterpart, though, if they actually discovered that we had omitted information, can still view us as a liar. So you can still face some interpersonal costs if they discover the true underlying information. So an alternative strategy is dodging. And this is, you've all witnessed it if you watch politicians. Politicians love using dodging. Why do they love doing it? It's because it's tremendously effective. So that's where you give a very eloquent response to a closely related question, but not the question that was asked. So if someone asks like, oh, like, do you have bipolar disorder? You can say, oh, actually, I'm happy you asked that. I was thinking about the company support for mental health. And really, actually, we probably need to get more engaged in initiatives for neurodiversity. I'm in the process of reaching out to HR and I'm hoping to hear back from them soon. And I'll be sure to keep you posted based off of what I hear. Dodging is really useful because if you give an eloquent response, people think that you're confident. It's also not certain to them why you didn't answer the original question that was asked. And it makes it unclear. And people might just think, okay, Brad misunderstood the question that was asked. So as a result, he answered a related one. But okay, he wasn't actually trying to actually deceive me. And as a result, it tends not to be as costly as lying or paltering if people discover the true underlying information. Dodging can be even more effective when coupled with the following strategy, which can also be used on its own, which is deflection. And that's when you use questions to redirect the conversation back to the question asker. So for example, if I use the last dodge and say, oh, well, actually, I'm waiting to hear back from HR about our initiatives for neurodiversity, you can follow up and say, do you know who I should actually reach out to? Like, who's a good point contact? I'm responding with a question. I'm shifting the conversation back to the question asker. And in doing so, I'm both violating this conversational norm, you're supposed to respond to questions, and also invoking it and making my counterpart feel compelled that they have to answer my question. And when I've run experiments testing this, I find that in 75% of the cases where someone's even financially incentivized to get the true information, they just respond to the question and move on with the conversation. So it's a very powerful tactic. And it's also beneficial because if people discover the true information, say that you have bipolar disorder or whatever it is, they infer that you were trying to seek more information and learn more information rather than that you were trying to hide information. And then finally, an additional tactic that can be really helpful in these situations is humor. So actually, by using humor and disclosing information in a way that you're joking about it, you're demonstrating that you're very confident about the underlying issue, that it's not actually a concern. You're making the other person laugh, which makes them like you more. Humor is very cognitively distracting. It pulls our attention away from negative information. And they also infer that you're just trying to entertain them rather than trying to seriously convey information. So a very famous example of someone using this to hide an underlying mental health issue was when Ronald Reagan was running for re-election. There were concerns about his mental health. He was going to be the oldest president to be elected at the time. And during the first debate, he showed signs of being lost, which now in hindsight, we know was because of early stage Alzheimer's. But during the second debate, when he was asked, "Oh, do you have concerns about your age?" He said, "I'm not going to make age an issue in this election. I'm not going to hold my opponent's youth and inexperience against him." And the entire crowd burst out laughing, including Mondale, his opponent. Mondale said that's when he knew he was going to lose the election, and no one returned to the issue. Like, this was a major issue. We're talking about one of the most public interviews possible, a very serious health issue, and he was able to completely get people to forget about it and move on by using humor. So humor is extremely important. The key thing with all of this is a summary of the strategies will be available. Think through what strategy you feel the most comfortable with using. It's going to vary depending on who you are, depending on who you'll be interacting with. And then just think about it and practice them, because getting more familiar with them and more confident and comfortable with delivering them will help you to, when you're in those situations where someone might ask a question you don't feel completely comfortable answering. So that way you can actually avoid disclosing in that situation.